Hey, everybody. Welcome back to The Gold Mine. We have another fantastic show for you today. I was having some issues with my light just earlier, and it was having conniption, so I figured I'd just pull it off, get rid of it, just in case anybody's wondering. Um, if you have any issues with that, you can come talk to me later, but no worries. So let's get into this conversation. I am stoked for it, and while I am stoked, you should be too. You should be hitting all the buttons, doing all the things. Like the show, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bells, do all that good stuff. Get your emails whenever we go live, which is, of course, Wednesdays for the Gold Mine and Fridays for the Collective. If you have any thoughts, questions, comments, anything at all, put them up in the comment section and we can hit those throughout the show. Other than that, I'm excited. Nathan, let's get an intro out and then we can get into this convo. 10 to 15 seconds. Who are you? Where you come from? All that good stuff.
Yeah, police officer in Edmonton, CEO of Vigilant Media Incorporated, and also a host of another podcast, The Quiet Professional. Over there, I'm just working to open dialogue and get people thinking about topics such as law enforcement, security, and justice. There you go.
I like it. Shaun, how's the mountains treating you?
Good. I'm getting a little bit of a weird delay, so just a bit of a heads up. Nathan, I will say this, that what you're putting out on social media is a bit more than you just quickly described. And so I always appreciate any time I see you put up a post because generally speaking, it's always something that is notable and something that is national and something that typically impacts all Canadians. And usually that impact is something that they're unaware of. So I do appreciate your efforts to educate anyone who's picking up what you're putting down.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Absolutely. This is it. And I could not agree more with that. I really love the stuff you do. And your podcast is excellent as well. I love the discussions that you guys get into because I don't think a lot of people think about what it's like to police other people. That's a whole nother realm to get into. Now, we are going to be talking about consequence today. And I wanted to get your guys' first thoughts on what does consequence mean to you, Nathan?
Yeah. So when I found out what the topic was, I was trying to think and look up definitions of some things because I was kind of going a little deep on it. But with consequences, right, result of some kind of action. But one thing I was kind of thinking too was, I think consequences always said in a negative perspective, right? So we don't really talk about consequences in the positive. And for consequences, um, you know, if we're going to talk about it in the negative sense, I think we have to always tie it back to our actions. So there's a sense of responsibility and accountability with that, which I'm sure we'll get into today.
Yes, indeed, we will. Shaun, what are your first thoughts?
Interesting. So I'm just pulling up my social media feed here. That is, I just put up this photo just before we went live. Literally 5 minutes ago, I put it up. One of the last things I did. And so I'm just going to quickly read what the verbiage that I attached to the photo. Hey, Chance, maybe you can pull up the photo. We have the ability, we have the technology.
We do. I'll get it set up. You start talking, I'll pull
All
it
right. So here's the verbiage that I attached to the photo, and it directly ties into what Nathan just said. I was thinking this morning about consequences and how consequences usually attach to the negative. There'll be consequences to this young man. And so it's usually coming in the mental landscape. Consequences usually a finger wagging, or you're in trouble, or you've done something wrong, or there's a downside to this. But consequences are simply, in my opinion, the outcome of your actions. The consequences or the outcome is based on what you've done, not what you will do in the future. And so, as I took this photo again, I don't know if Chance is going to be able to pull up that photo, but good man. I see you're pulling something up there. Right on. So the verbiage is this. A couple of minutes prior to this photo, I was working so hard I couldn't spit. You wouldn't know it by looking at this photo. That's because I'm used to operating in this state. I'm used to working hard, familiar with the sting, with no drama required. You can tell a lot about a person in moments of hardship. I think there's a direct correlation between the following two operating states. Consistently doing hard things results in a confident, relaxed presence. Constantly living a soft life creates drama queens. I know this much: the internet would benefit from a lot less drama. Think about how much drama do you put out on the internet. Instead of spitting out drama, maybe you can try not being able to spit at all for a few weeks. Just a thought. And so the reason that I put that up is because I do find that a lot of people out there don't face the sting. They don't face the consequence. They actually play dress up on the internet. They'll spend $1,000 buying an outfit that they'll wear. It still smells like brand new. And now they're posing like they've been in the game for a decade, even though the reek coming off their brand new gear should make them rethink what they're doing, how they're living their life. And so the artificiality of the internet has diluted the understanding of consequence to some degree. That was my first thought. And it just so happens that, the reason I'm highlighting this photo again is because Nathan, when he started off this conversation, it almost dovetails precisely into what I was trying to state this morning with this photo. Consequence should come with sting. Consequence should come with a result. It should not be a dress-up game.
I'm liking where we're going. Nathan, you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I might take just a slightly different direction just to start, because there was something you mentioned there, Shaun, that I liked as well. The mental side of it. So there's the mental and the physical aspect. Yeah, a lot of people right now, they don't really seem to feel the physical consequences, right? They're behind a keyboard, they're saying something online, they're not going to get hit, but the mental side of it. So if someone does something wrong, I guess what we want to try to instill in people is, at the very least, they feel a sense of accountability or responsibility, or that something might be coming down the road. So that's kind of the effect on the mental side. But yeah, I like the analogy how he's talking about the clothes and still you got the reek on you. That's a really good one. Paints a good visual. But with the sorry, you were going to go ahead there, Chance?
No, I was just going to jump in. I thought you were done, so you can carry on. What do you got?
No, I was just going to kind of continue on the accountability side, just real quick. Just talking about, I think we've lost that sense of accountability, that a lot of people don't have that. And whether it's because of this whole internet generation, or maybe we're just in person, we're even too soft on people. We don't push them to think about accountability or what's going to be the outcome of their decisions. I think we could do a lot better in that space. So
100% agree. We've had a number of shows on accountability specifically, and I could not agree more with that. I want to hit these real quick. John Minari, good to see you. Morning Squad. Salty Jinx, good day. All good to see you, buddy. And then we got a couple people on the Instagram feed too as well. Good to see you all out there. I have some videos here specifically on that. So I'm going to put this video up and then we're going to discuss it. And it goes right in line with what we're talking about. So stick with me here. Here we go.
Fight in high school. 3 guys were saying disparaging things about my sister, 1 year younger than me. And I said, you can't talk about my sister like that. And I got in a huge fight with them, and I was beating the living dog poop out of them. And they pulled me down to the principal's office. He said, what if what they're saying about your sister is accurate? I went across the table and tried to punch him right at that point in time. And I had to be restrained. They had to call in the police. And I said, I'm going to kill you. You can't talk about my sister that way. And he's like, oh my God. So he calls my dad. And he goes, he was in a fight. My dad said, so why are you calling me? We want to let you know your son was in a fight. He said, my dad said, what are the rules? What are the consequences of getting in a fight? He said, suspension. If my son got in a fight and you say the rules are that if you get in a fight, you get suspended, suspend my son. Why are you calling me? So I got a 3-day suspension. I came home and I was furious. You betrayed me. He said, sit down. If you hadn't defended your sister's honor, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I'd be so disappointed in you. Never been more proud of you in my life. I said, okay, but why didn't you step in? He said, no. There are consequences for your actions. Just because you do the right thing doesn't mean you don't pay a price. You did the right thing, but it's not the right thing if you get away with it. It's the right thing because it was the right thing to do, but now you have to pay the price. You made a decision to break the rules, and I support that decision. You were defending the honor of your sister, but now you must pay the price, or else your actions are meaningless. If you stand up and do the right thing and you don't pay a price, you get away. It's too easy. He said, doing the right thing is sometimes the hardest thing in the world. That was one of the biggest lessons of my life. Do what's right, but be prepared to pay the price, that there's no free ride. And that was a huge lesson. It guided me in everything.
Bam. What are you guys' thoughts? Nathan, coming to you first.
Yeah, certainly there's a price to pay for a lot of things, I guess, but this kind of makes me think of something like speaking truth to power. This is maybe I wouldn't have like the physical interaction that guy had. I haven't had that scenario play out, but for me, it's more like speaking truth to power. So you got to learn how to manage your words and what's the expectation of the person you're dealing with. It's kind of like bringing their world into your thoughts at the same time you're trying to formulate, what am I going to be doing, to deal with this scenario that's in front of me. But I totally agree there, doing the right thing is going to be hard. You might not like the rules, right? Depends where you live, the organization you work for. There's rules everywhere that we have to follow. And, based on your, whether it's religion or your morals or your ethics, doing the right thing to you might bear some very different consequences. So
that's a good point. I can't remember where I heard it. I think it was a movie at one point. Somebody was saying sometimes doing the right thing isn't doing the right thing sometimes, and vice versa. But Shaun, what thoughts you got? You're still muted.
I don't necessarily agree with how that guy played it out, his dad and the kid. That's not really how I would play it out as a dad. But I have a direct example of this. And so when I was a kid in high school, and this is junior high, and this goes to what Nathan was saying, and I'm just going to generalize it as knowing what's right and wrong. You know what's right and you know what's wrong. And your ideas of what's right and wrong are developed over time. And over time, they change. But as a young boy, my idea of what was right and wrong was fixed to about that size. Now it's this big as an adult. But I only had what I had to work with at the time as to what right and wrong means to Shaun. And so the situation was a teacher was giving me a super duper hard time. And I kind of pushed back a little bit and said, no, I'm not going to do that. I don't agree with that. And I had my reasons for it, and they were good, solid, rightful reasons to me at the time. The teacher threw me out of the class, straight down to the principal's office, and there I was in the principal's office. And the principal and I didn't really see eye to eye. And so the principal was giving me a super hard time. And so I pushed back and I said, yeah, that's your opinion, man. And so, I had a little bit of attitude in my voice. I had some tone, and it wasn't received well. And he said, hold out your hand. You're going to get the strap. And I said, no, I ain't. And he said, hold out your hand. No, I won't. And this standoff, this Mexican standoff, went on for a while. And he was a big boy, and he was really imposing. He was hanging over top of me, and I was sitting down in the principal's office seat. And it was a moment, man. And I had to decide whether I was going to capitulate or not. And I chose to stand my ground, or more correctly, sit in my seat and say, no, I ain't holding my hand out. And then he said, if you don't hold your hand out, I'm going to call your mom or your dad. And I said, go ahead. The phone's right there. And I pointed directly at the phone. And he didn't even know what to do with that. So he picked up the phone. I gave him the number. He called. My mom said, I'll be right there. So she came to the principal's office and she said, what's going on? And he relayed his story, which was a gong show story because he hadn't talked to the teacher with great detail. So he was going off of assumptions and he'd inferred a bunch of stuff. And basically I was the bad guy, and that was all there was to it in his little story in his head, which was incorrect. And so basically, he proposed that your son is being defiant because he won't let me give him the strap. And my mom looked at me and said, "Did you do any of that? Did you say any of that? Do you deserve the strap?" And I just looked at my mom and said, "No." And I ain't holding out my hand. And she looked at the principal and said, "He's not going to hold out his hand." And then she turned and walked. And then that left the principal in a difficult moment. Now, what was he going to do? I smirked at him because that's my way. And so it did not do me any favors because there's consequences. Sometimes in the immediate moment where I could have got the strap, but then there's consequences after the fact because I smirked. So I didn't get the strap, but that guy, he did his best to make my life a misery for the rest of my time in high school that he was there. And so you either get the immediate consequences or sometimes you get the delayed consequences. And sometimes none of them are fair. But that's how you learn how to navigate life. I've learned from that little moment that I had with that principal, it taught me a few things. Certainly, one of the things that it taught me is, man, you can have any title in the world hovering above your head, principal, emperor of the world. None of that matters to me. It stopped mattering to me in that moment. That's when I defined my example of how to live the world as titles are not important. What is important is being righteous or being good or making the fair call. And so if someone is unfair, if someone is being is taking advantage of the situation and both parties know it, the consequences just shouldn't be blindly accepted. Now, I'm not telling everyone to always push back on every little thing. What I am saying is if something doesn't feel right to you, you should never accept the consequences if you don't deserve them. But if there are consequences to be accepted because you did wrong, it's your job to accept them. That doesn't mean that you have to accept the totality of the consequences. There's a negotiation in there, perhaps, which maybe we'll get into later in the podcast.
Yeah. This is I had a similar situation happen to me in the Army, and I did stand up against a senior enlisted member who made my life very challenging afterwards, and rightly so in the way in which it happened. And it taught me a much better way to engage higher ranks instead of what I did. And I think this is it's a beautiful point in terms of I wrote down here the difference between defiance and righteousness, as you said, because there's ability to be righteous in the moment, and there is just being defiant. So I think it's an interesting line to kind of hover on. Nathan, you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah. If I could just pick up on it real quick. Shaun, you're laying out exactly like that, speaking truth to power. I think, especially as a younger man, I'd be in the same boat where I wouldn't know how to speak truth to power. I wouldn't know how to explain my position, right? And I think sometimes now, obviously having a lot more life experience, I sort of realize we're not stuck with our outcome. So even though you did an action, and then you might think, okay, I did this action. The rules say this is going to be my consequence, whenever that might come down the timeline. But based on some of you still have time in between, I guess is what I would say, is you now have time to talk to people, maybe the person who's deciding what they're going to do as a consequence. You can explain your point. You can take that time to say, this is why I did it, instill some logic into the debate, and from that you can change your outcomes. So the consequences, I guess, they're not always set, but there is room still for change. At the end of the day, I guess in your scenario, if that principal has it out for you, you're going to find a consequence at the end of the road in some form or fashion. But I mean, you come across that in life in general. So you just got to kind of deal with it and roll with the punches there.
Acceptance of consequences is such a key thing. Shaun, you got anything to add?
Well, Nathan, you're in the job. It's your industry. It's your career is all about this. I mean, you totally understand this far better than Chance and I do, I believe. So you could probably speak all day on this. But the universality of this subject can be dovetailed into any industry, into any career, into any life story. I don't think there's a human on the planet that hasn't faced consequences due to their actions, sometimes fair, sometimes unfair, sometimes kind of fair and not kind of fair. This is life. And to your point, as a young man, I didn't know how to navigate that moment. Now I navigate it a whole lot differently, but I'd probably still throw a bit of a sneer in there. And that's kind of an important topic, I think, because in these moments where there's difficulties or adversity or challenges, we're not supposed to take on an alter ego. We're not supposed to be like Batman in one moment and then Joker in the other. We're supposed to be who we are. And we're supposed to learn how to use our sense of that and our experience, our life experience, and our ability to interact with other humans. We're supposed to keep doing it better throughout our life. We're supposed to become more educated in life. And so, as a kid, I didn't do it that well. Now I do it a lot better, but I'd still be true to myself. I'd still be true to the moment. I'd just do it maybe a little more nuanced.
Not quite as direct, right? Nathan, you got any other points on this?
Yeah, maybe two in there. Just real quick, I'll talk about discretion. So obviously, as a person who's maybe you're on the end of setting consequences, I guess most of our context here has been you're the one receiving it, but maybe you're the one implementing it. There is discretion. So obviously, that's something that comes up in my line of work. And there is time, we deal with someone, we get the call, we go, and it's like, this event occurred. Okay, I know I'm looking at whatever it might be, a theft or an assault or something, but when you go and get the side of everybody, right? There's always two sides to the story and the witnesses and evidence. Well, then it changes your trajectory of like what you're actually thinking about is going to happen in the end. What's the end result I'm trying to get to? Are we even looking at charges, say, or is there a fine? Am I even compelling someone to court? So you still have kind of a decision to make in there. The other part where you're talking about, I guess maybe the word would be consistency with how you carry yourself. And I had this conversation recently with someone about that very thing. Uh, you don't want to be putting on the act because people can see through that. And if you're one person at home or you're one person in a different part of your life, and people get to see you in those different aspects of your life, they start to see that if you're not being consistent, then it's an act. And then I think people get a little scared around you because they don't know how to act, right? They don't know, well, what is this person about? Yeah, there's just quick points I want to add there.
That's a great point in terms of the different faces. This is something that I used to do, especially when I was in the grips of PTSD and trying to figure myself out in that moment. Was I would put up a mask. I'm fine. There's the mask. I'd go to somebody else and it would be a different mask. And I'd be just with my boys and there'd be a different mask. And I'd be with my wife and it'd be a different mask. And nobody really knows who the true person is. And so there's never really an ability to gauge how to manage that person in the moment because you don't really know who they are because you're just looking at a mask. Shaun, what do you got?
Just one more thing based on Nathan said it and it popped into my head is I just want to add a new piece to this. And that is, as a young, we'll call it a young police officer, when you're out doing your job initially, you have maybe two circumstances to consider. One is you're learning on the job by yourself. You don't have a partner. Your boss is never around. You're out on the streets. You're doing your thing. You're having to learn it the hard way through failure, or reflection. But the other operating state is now you've got a partner or now you've got a supervisor who's constantly helping you out, helping you refine the process. And so that's also like life. Sometimes we're in the moment by ourselves and we've got to figure it all out. So Chance used the example. If you could have, at the time, seen all of your various masks and realized it for what it was, then you could have got to work on reducing that. But more often than not, we can't see all of our masks because the mask we're wearing doesn't allow us to see them. And so that's when people around us are supposed to get involved, either family or neighbors or friends or someone across the internet. If they see something is off, it's our responsibility to step in and try to be helpful, and not maybe to steer someone away from all of the lessons that they need to learn, but just help them understand the lessons as they're learning them. And so we could probably play with that a little bit as well.
Indeed. Nathan, you got anything else, or I have other videos to set up as well. So like, if you got more points, by all means, we can hit them. Give it. What do you got?
I was gonna say you give her on the videos.
Okay, I got another one. So to specifically to the point of learning how to deal with consequences, I think that this video will sum it up. But we're gonna hit this, and then we can get your thoughts on it. Here we go.
You should have to learn some form of combat to get a degree in college. And I don't care what it is, kickboxing, marksmanship, fencing, friggin' sumo. It should be part of, what they call the generals, right? If not to defend yourself, if not to defend others, then at least to understand why other people might be inclined to. You gotta learn English, math, history, science, and now fighting. And then you can finish your degree in engineering or like the theater arts if you want. Like, why do we pretend that self-defense isn't academic? Like, it's not something that can be taught to anybody, just like anything else. We live as if it's not a skill that everybody should master in order to lead a productive life, become a knowledgeable citizen, and communicate their ideas as a useful member of society. How did knowing how to protect yourself become a hobby or a sport on par with, like, pickleball or frisbee golf? Oh, but Mike, not everybody is athletic and maybe not everybody's gonna be good at fighting. So what? I'm not good at reading Bildung's romance novels, but I'd still have to read Jane Eyre to fulfill my culinary arts degree requirements. So you're telling me like the philosophical concepts of anarcho-primitivism is essential to a well-adjusted, educated person, but not like how to block a punch? And look, I get that you can study these things in college. I just don't understand why it's not a requirement if your goal is to create a well-educated, well-rounded individual. Remember that martial arts is not a hobby, it's a life skill.
Bam. What are you guys' thoughts, Nathan?
Oh man, there's a lot there. I think two of the things that I kind of picked up on was maybe negotiation and pressure in there. So when they're talking about martial arts, like I've done a number of years of martial arts, and one of the best things I found from it was you learn how to operate under pressure, right? There's a kick coming at your head, there's a punch coming at your face. You got to start using your brain, and much of martial arts is a mental game, right? Everyone has the plan till they get punched in the face. Well, you have to be able to have some plan. You have to be able to think under that or in that environment. But also, it's a bit of a negotiation where you are looking at the person in front of you, you're seeing what they're doing. Now you're considering yourself in this position and what am I doing? So it's a bit of a dance in there, a back and forth. There's not a whole lot of talking in the martial arts, unless maybe in jiu-jitsu, you can whisper something in someone's ear. But I think the best thing about that, and I really like the martial arts aspect, and I just think it brings a sense of calmness, especially when there's a storm around you. So can you deal with pressure? Are you able to negotiate that situation? It's more of a high stress one. But also, if you're not doing it properly, back to the subject is there's consequences, right? You could get a real hurt put on you if you're not doing those things properly. So yeah, those are some themes that I was kind of picking up from what he was talking about.
Yeah, 100%. I'm in 100% agreement with you. I saw exactly the same thing. Shaun, what are you thinking?
Well, so I thought a few things. And initially, as he was coming across with the video, he was kind of coming at it from a perspective of everyone needs to know how to throw a good punch. Everyone's got to be able to do a bit of combat. That's kind of how I was picking up what he was putting down initially. And then he kind of refined it at the back end with the reference to, we have to read Jane Eyre, and then at the same time, we should learn about combat sports. And so I don't think anyone ever needs to know how to throw a punch. I think everyone should, but I don't think everyone has to in order to learn about themselves. You can walk into a university, sit down in front of a lecturer, and if I'm lecturing, I'm going to teach you about combat arts without me having to throw a roundhouse kick. And no one will have to get sweaty in the moment. No one will have to do any Thai boxing in or any P90X combat art workout in the seats. What I will do is challenge them to better understand themselves, which I think is what combat arts or martial arts is all about. Knowing yourself and then knowing others, and then how to put those two things together. And I find that a lot of people don't know themselves. A lot of people don't know themselves in front of another person, and they least know themselves when there's confrontation in place. And so confrontation usually builds up to that idea of, oh, there's going to be consequence to this. And that's when all the white noise occurs in a human's mind, if they're not used to that moment. And that's kind of in Nathan's industry, when a human who has got no sense of what it means to interact with another human it doesn't even have to be a violent encounter. It can just be a intense moment. People will move out of a proper operating state and move into a part of their life that they don't understand because they're kind of making it up in the moment. I'm scared. I don't know what to do. Now I'm going to turn into a freak because I don't know what else to do. So I'm going to be a freak. And so in universities, young minds, having just come out of high school, I believe that's a great time for someone to step in front of a podium and address a large audience every day in a study called, name it whatever you want, combat psychology, martial arts mindfulness. Give it a cool title, but it's going to be about humans learning how to be better humans. Because that's generally what university is all about, except a large chunk of it is directed specifically at 1780 to 1790 French philosophers. And so that's going to teach you about French philosophy, but it's not going to teach you how to be cool in moments where it's uncool. So martial arts will teach you a lot. It'll teach you to defend yourself, but mostly it'll teach you about who you are in the moment.
Yes. And I think the reason I picked that particular clip was the fact that when you first start learning martial arts, you start learning about immediate consequences, right? If I don't do this, I get kicked in the face, right? That's unpleasant. But later in the game, as you start to refine it, as you start to get better at it, you start to realize that, the extended consequences of things, in that, I can set things up. I can threaten with one thing in order to gain access to a different realm. And I think this is part of understanding consequence, both good and bad, is that it's not just about getting punched in the face. Sometimes it's about being able to punch somebody else in the face, and understanding all of that in between. At least in my mind, that there's a lot more that you can learn from the combat arts than is required as by doing just jujitsu or by doing just a particular thing. But I'd like your point, Shaun, in terms of perhaps it's how to get punched in the face 101 class you got to take and then go from there. Nathan, you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think you guys are right on point. I think what a lot of people miss with martial arts is just that whole mental game of it. I think most people kind of see it as whatever they see in the movies, and they kind of lose track of like the purpose of it. So martial arts has a huge there could even be a huge spiritual component to it. But when we're talking about knowing yourself, and again, I guess it might lead a little bit into consistency talk. like when Sean's saying, some of the scenarios we come across in my job is you get a person who's in a scenario that they've never been in, and then they start acting just wildly, right? Like, and you're going, what are you doing? Like, why are you acting like this? Again, for me, that's someone I would talk to with, you're using de-escalation, you're using words, and that's stuff that I've learned over time. But that's also something I've incorporated into my character and the way I do policing. So it's about being consistent, whether I'm talking to kids or adults. It's being the same kind of person throughout those interactions, because at the end of the day, people are still people, and communication goes a long way. So there is a time to act, and certainly those are consequences that people have to deal with. But there's a huge negotiation period in the middle, longer than I think a lot of people think. But there's a huge period there where it's like, okay, let's get to the bottom of this and let's talk about why we're acting this way today. Maybe right back to the points that we were making at the very beginning, though. I think when we do talk about consequences, what gets lost in a lot of these discussions is the root cause. So why are we actually here today? Back to the principal video, or sorry, the principal example you had, Sean. What I see a lot of people seem to lack is the ability to like dig a bit deeper and look at the actual root cause of why we're doing something. So when you get a lot of those decision makers, I call them managers, not leaders, because they're simply there just to manage a situation, put a cap on it and move on. Whereas a leader might actually think that scenario through and go, okay, why are we actually here? And that will also change the consequences that people get as a result. Because if we're here because someone started something and they had no business doing that, and then say someone's simply defending themselves, in self-defense, does that person necessarily deserve consequences, even if the school has a policy that says there will be no fighting? Well, I guess that's up for debate. So
I like where this is going. Sean, you got any points to add?
I do. And so there is another aspect to consequences on this subject, and that is, and Nathan made me think of it, as you're moving through a career, or as you're moving through your life, or as you're moving through martial arts or anything where on day one you knew nothing and year 10 you know more. Along that journey, you're supposed to gain nuance. You're supposed to gain a deeper understanding of things. And so day one policing, you're almost a victim yourself if you've never been in these moments that are just freaky. So 10 years later, you're not a victim anymore, unless you haven't processed a whole bunch of things and now you're dealing with some mental health issues, which is an entirely different subject. So you can be a victim 10 years later, even though you're the most qualified person on paper to manage that moment or lead that moment. But again, that's a different subject. What I will say is this, that consequences aren't just they're not just a on-off switch. They're not a binary thing for us as individuals within our lives. The consequences that I deserved when I was a kid in high school would be different than the consequences I deserve now. And my understanding of those consequences are really quite different. And so as a police officer, to use the industry as a great example, year after year after year, you're supposed to get better at dealing out consequences, handing out consequences, understanding consequences, paying attention to the consequences on yourself from dealing with the consequences. And so I think life is a feedback loop. We're supposed to pay attention to the data that we put out and the data that comes in. And through that feedback loop, which we're constantly in, we're supposed to try and understand it more and more each time. So again, day one rookie, the consequences of the moment will look different than year 10 seasoned veteran. So consequences are not on off, up, down, left, right. As the years tick by, there's more and more nuance.
Less black and white, a lot more gray. A lot more gray. Nathan, I saw you taking notes. What do you got?
There you go. My mouse wasn't working for 2 seconds there. You know what? Since we're on the top of martial arts and we're talking about consequences of consequences, and further down the road, maybe was it Bruce Lee who said that? Drop the rock in the pond and there's like the ripple effect. I don't know his exact words, but something to that effect. I'm thinking. So I was kind of envisioning that. But then on the flip side, you either are a person who kind of is aware of that. If I do this action here, it's going to have an effect on these 2-3 people. And then what are they going to think? And what are they going to do? Or on the flip side, like a lot of people I deal with, I think they only think about themselves in the moment. And I'll say it's for like the immediate gratification or the immediate getting out of trouble. They're only thinking about that instant, and they're not thinking about what's coming down the road. So if I act this way, it gets me out of this scenario. But now the police kind of think about me in this certain light. And what's the ripple effect? Maybe they think of my community in a certain way. Maybe they think about my school or my club or whatever I'm in. They think about it a certain way. So it's just, I was kind of tossing that around in my head as you were speaking there. So, yeah.
I like that. I just want to touch on this real quick. On the Instagram side, Lisa Lemire said, "Hello, everyone listening while at work. Good to see you, Lisa." To that point, when Shaun and I signed up for the military, I'm sure it's probably the same. You get told pretty quickly that you are no longer just you. You're now a representative of the Canadian Armed Forces. And if you were to go downtown and get into a fight, it's not Chance Burles got into a fight downtown. It's Canadian Armed Forces soldier beat up a civilian in town. Like the consequences aren't your own. And it's something that you need to accept as being part of that organization. But to your point, Nathan, is the fact that we are part of organizations all over the place. We're part of school boards, we're parents, we're part of, anything that you're involved in any way, you become a representative of that organization or that group or that family or that whatever. So I think that's a beautiful point to bring up, and that the consequences are not your own. It's shared. You just have to take the consequences, but it's a shared consequence, I think. Shaun, you got any additional points on this?
Yeah, just what Nathan said earlier about managers and leaders. If a manager shows up to deal with a situation, they're going to deal with what I consider as the moment. But a leader will show up to the situation and they'll deal with the lifetime of all the moments. And so a good leader will show up, take care of the problem or be part of the solution. But in so doing, they'll be passing on deeper lessons, more nuanced lessons, layered solutions within a single solution. A manager will provide one solution, a leader will provide many solutions. And some of those solutions won't be unpacked by the people in the situation for sometimes years. I've had good leaders in the past where I'll probably 2 years from now have an aha moment when I realize, put the two dots together and think, oh yeah, man, I wish I could have picked up what he was putting down at that time. That's good leading. And leadership we're desperate for good leaders nowadays in all industries, in all moments, all around the planet. And so, not to beat a dead horse, but if you're involved with anyone in trying to be helpful in any way, try to show up as a leader, not as a manager.
Bam. I like it. Now, I got another video. Unless you guys got any other points that we want to hit on this before we move on, good to go. All right, let's jump into this one.
Is do hard things. We have this thought that life is supposed to be easy and that comfort is where we're going to gain happiness. You can have a life of ease and And that will give you a quick hit of dopamine. But make no mistake, that is not the path. It is exactly the opposite. This chart right here shows our lives. And this is what happens. We get kind of complacent, or we get comfortable. And if we want to move forward and get to the next peak, the magic is to understand that your life is almost always going to get worse first. If you want to change careers and you want to learn something new, you're going to go down the learning curve. Your salary is probably going to go down. You're going to not be good at your job. You want to start a new habit. You want to take a cold shower. You want to meditate. You want to start exercising. It's going to get worse first. And you're going to follow this pattern, but you need to realize that the thing that's keeping you there is the first move is always going to be worse. Eventually what's going to happen is these downward curves are going to get a lot shallower, because you know what the biggest part of that curve is? It's just fear. So the more you put yourself in situations where you do hard things, the shallower and shallower those divots are going to get, because you're going to remove that fear. Everything that you want in this life is on the other side of worse first.
Bam. This is a point that I tried to make the other day, and the fact that if we can accept the consequences ahead of time, it makes it almost a little bit easier to drive down that hill, because you're like, yeah, all right, let's get some. What are you guys' thoughts? Nathan, what do you got?
I thought, I was like, well, maybe we could talk about podcasting and starting that up, because you want to talk about fear. Boy, I was scared of looking stupid and saying stupid things, and this, inviting guests on, and they're gonna be like, who's this guy? And why would I ever talk to him? So I would say, yeah, that was definitely something, looking at moving out of the comfort zone. But I think when I was doing that, and I imagine probably the same for you, it's looking ahead at like, well, here's the consequences, or the result, or the effect, if we want to call it a positive thing. I think it outweighed my fear of jumping into this. And that's what kind of kept me going, is I was really focused on the end result. And it's like, well, you know what, if I got to suffer or struggle or take on some hardship in the meantime, then so be it. But if it's going to get me to this point I want to get to, and I really believe in what I'm doing, whether that's to better others' lives or myself, it was worth it in the end. And I think that's part of what he was trying to get across there, is there is this end result, and the lows start to get a little shallower as you go along. So like if I was to use the podcast as an example, start the podcast, I mean, that was a ton of work and it was a lot of fear. But from that, then start working on a university course and partnering with the university. That was a lot less fear, because you already have some relationships and you're kind of on a path. You can bring some things along that you've picked up along the way, and you're kind of carrying those experiences with you, so you can go into those next things. So one thing leads to another. And I think that's where he's talking about, like those the pits are kind of getting shallower and shallower, because if you're on this trajectory, you're already bringing all these skills with you and the experiences. So
Yeah, I really like that. And I think also on top of that is that as you add more skills, you start to be able to apply each of those skills to the next thing. So there's less of that learning curve of like, oh, now I got to start at zero, because you're starting with experience. You have some idea where you're going. Shaun, what do you got?
Okay, I got to stir it up just a little bit.
Yeah, there it is.
So while I do agree with the spirit of his message, I do agree with it. And all three of us could sit here and spend the rest of the day talking about how what he said is correct. As you proceed, the troughs get narrower and narrower, shallower or shallower. But I don't run my life like that. And so that can happen, but I don't allow that to happen. And that's an important distinction. Because and I'm turning 61 this month. It's my birthday on October 24th. You can send me all the gifts. So if I was to, in my 60s, believe that I'm entitled to this trajectory, and I should be entitled to it. I've worked freaking hard all my life. I got a body of work that is pretty solid. If I'm about here, and now I'm expecting all of my troughs to be a bit shallower because of all the hard work I've done, well, now what I'm doing is I'm accepting a way of life that I haven't accepted up till this point. Because what got me here was the ability to dig deep into a trough, irrespective of what I know or don't know, irrespective of my experience or not. My experience should make my life easier, but I choose to make it more difficult. So I won't accept shallow troughs. I want to go all the way down into the trough and feel it and work my way back up through it again. Nathan is right. Podcasting is a perfect example of this. I found it incredibly difficult to start off, and I still find it incredibly difficult. Exposing my public thoughts or my public mind or my forward-facing avatar, I don't care for it. It's uncomfortable. And when Nathan was talking about appearing to be a fool, there isn't a day that I'm in front of a microphone that I don't regret something that I said. Because I say dumb things sometimes. And that's because I try not to clamp down on my filter so much that I become inauthentic. I like to push my boundaries a little bit when I'm communicating with others. And sometimes that gives me moments of regret as I review it later that night or as I reflect on it later that day. We're all imperfect as humans. I'm not a cyborg. I don't have perfect speech and I don't have perfect answers. And when you're public facing, that can lead to, oh, I wish I hadn't have said that. But I don't regret most of the things that I say because I know that nowadays I'm literally doing my best. So I like to get into the trough as deep as possible, do my best, know that I'm going to screw it up. And then as I'm coming out of that trough and maybe leveling out to that, continuing on my incline, I'm going to look for something else to trough into. And so Shaun will never run his life on shallower and shallower and shallower troughs as I move into my 70s. In fact, I'll probably look for deeper troughs than when I was in my 30s.
Shaun can use his pot stirring spoon as a shovel at the same time. It's that big. Nathan, you got anything else on this?
Yeah, I think that video is speaking to a very particular audience. So I totally agree with what Sean's saying, but I think we might be slightly different people than what that video might be speaking to. Sean's going to be the human embodiment of a standard deviation. So, but it's yeah, I think they're talking like, you're the couch potato and you sit at home and you're not pushing yourself to do anything exciting or outside the norm of what you normally do. I think that's where they're kind of going with that. Whereas, yeah, for ourselves here, you're talking about creating a show. You have that forward-facing avatar, like you're putting yourself out there and you're opening yourself to critique and criticism and all kinds of things. But at the end of the day, and I guess when I was kind of starting some of this stuff, I just eventually said, I really don't give a shit. Like, I don't care if they don't like it. If people want to critique it and stuff, because someone's got to do it and nobody else is doing it. So why don't I do it? If I've got the ability and the will and a little bit of the knowledge, I think there are people out there that look for those opportunities. And that's kind of the people in this room, the guests that we have on our shows. Like, we seek those people out, right? Because they add something to us as well. And we carry that forward. I mean, I for my podcast, I don't know how to do any of the audio. One of my coworkers, Steph Bosch, she helps with all the audio. She does it all. Fantastic job. I have all these guests on. When I put a lot of the stuff out on social media, that's because I'm talking to a lot of different people who know stuff more than I do, but I'm taking little bits and pieces here and there, and I'm learning how to ask more questions and dig deeper on things. And that's how I think we get ahead. It's when you just sit around and become kind of stale and stagnant. That's when you start to, yeah, you can have those shallower pits, but you're not going to have as fulfilling of a life.
That's a great point. I wrote down here, you said willingness and the action. You have the willingness to do something, and you're going to do it. The knowledge comes later. At least that's what I've learned so far from doing all the different things that I've done in my life, is that as much as you can research ahead of time, you won't know until you do it. You won't really know. And to podcasting is a great example. Yeah, when I first started, I thought I needed a mic and a camera and an idea. And then you start realizing, oh man, I need to edit this, or I need to clean this up. You become a bit of an audio engineer, and then you start to go down that rabbit hole, or you find somebody that can do it better than you can. You go, okay, cool. That's a nice little segment. But I think it stems from the acceptance of the consequences of not knowing anything, right? Like if you, as we say on the show pretty regularly, you go into a white belt moment, you go into a white belt situation. As a newbie, you just accept the consequences of I'm going to screw this up. Let's go. There's no additional thoughts. Whereas for a lot of people, just that consequence of I'm not going to know everything scares them away. And I think this is it's an interesting point. Shaun, what do you got?
Well, it does. It does scare people away. Tying on a new white belt is scary. Stepping into a new moment is scary. And not scary for everyone, but scary for most people. And again, I've done a few things in my life, but podcasting freaked me out. And so I shouldn't have been freaked out, but I was. Why was I freaked out? Again, because you put yourself on display, and that's uncomfortable. But what makes me most uncomfortable is the point that was brought up earlier in the show, and that is you're kind of representing. Now, I'm not representing the Airborne Regiment by wearing this hoodie, but I'm definitely not going to disrespect it by doing my worst job ever. And so I'm going to try to represent by being righteous, whatever that means to anyone out there in the moment. But that doesn't mean that it's a home run every moment. More often than not, you strike out. That's called failure. But all of these efforts, all of these attempts, as long as you're doing them righteously, as long as you're doing them for the right reasons in your mind, if they feel soulfully, like you're being legit, then failures will teach you what you need to know. And you shouldn't regret those failures. You just got to do your best to keep pushing forward in a righteous manner, and it'll always take you to where you belong. That's a message that is rarely said out there by people who've accomplished big things. The society generally focuses on their accomplishments. And because society talks so much about the accomplishments, the person who has the accomplishments starts to believe in their accomplishments. And so I think we could all improve by paying far less attention to the things we've done and focusing on the things that we need to do now, the things that we can do in the future to add more to our resume, as it were. But in so doing, let everyone else know that, again, at 61, podcasting still freaks me out. And whatever else I engage in the future, when I time my white belt moment, it's not going to be easy peasy lemon squeezy. It's going to be freaking hellacious, man. Because as I stand on the edge of that trough, my trough isn't this deep. Because anything that I'm going to engage in has to count. Anything that I engage in has to have a sting. And so a shallow trough doesn't create a sting for me. I need to look down into almost an abyss, a blackness, an unknown, a freaky unknown, for me to jump into it and engage and think, this is going to be a hell of a ride. So consequentially, I'm going to do my best, but I'm also going to try to represent whatever I'm engaged in at that moment, be it martial arts, podcasting, veterans, or whatever finger I've got my pie in, as we all do in our individual lives. It's for us to figure out how to best represent ourselves and them. And while we're doing that, let them know that the game of life is never easy. You just got to do your best.
Bam. So says the military free fall parachutist, right? I need an abyss. Just give me something to jump into. I like it. Nathan, you got any points on this? Anything else?
Yeah, maybe I'll just kind of wrap that point up with just saying I've learned a lot more by saying I don't know than by trying to be the source of knowledge for a lot of things. I think a lot of people are afraid of that. They're afraid of saying I don't know. I don't know if it's just a humility thing, but I think maybe most of it comes down to consequences. They think there's going to be something, either they're going to maybe people won't like them as much, or they won't think they're intelligent, or maybe if you don't know and it's part of your job, maybe you do get in actual trouble. But I think a lot of people are just afraid to say I don't know, and I'll either find you the answer or I'll point you in the right direction. Over the years, that's just something that I've worked on developing, because I never used to do that. But again, talking to people much smarter than me, um, I think I've incorporated that quite a bit in my lifestyle. And if I don't know an answer, I have no problem saying that. I tell people, but I'll help you find the answer. I'll help point you in the right direction. So I think that comes with a bit of humility, though. And I don't know, we got to teach people that part again.
This is one of the struggles of the show consistently. I can't say that of the show, but like the information that we put out there and the people that we follow and the people that are out there in the sphere trying to better the community. It's one of the most consistent challenges I hear from everybody of just like, we're putting this all out there, but it doesn't seem like people want to listen because it's hard. It's hard to accept some of these truths. It's hard to deal with the consequences of, 20, 30 years of not doing anything and then having to change your life. It's a difficult consequence to manage, but that's part of the process, I think, in my mind. Now, we are a little bit over an hour, so I want to get some final thoughts. Anything at all still bubbling in the back of your brain on consequence, or anything else that we have touched on at all? Nathan, what do you got?
No, you know what? I think it was a really good conversation. I liked where it was going. And I think we covered some of the most important parts when we're talking about accountability. But in the end, kind of like I try to do on my show, is like we wrap up with solutions. And because I always want to leave it a little bit on a positive note, because there's a lot of doom and gloom out there. But when we're talking about just, how to jump into things, how to kind of get over some of the hurdles, I think we brought that up, and I think we offered some solutions to people. So, and if they need to reach out, they can always ask. I'm sure you guys, but I'm always free to help people with any of their issues.
Bam. Love it. Shaun, what do you got?
The consequence of not facing the consequence is kind of how I would like to end off. And that doesn't have to be negative or positive. That shouldn't be a doom and gloom comment, and it shouldn't be a shoot up the fireworks comment. The consequence of not facing the consequences is something for you to chew on, if you're listening right now. And I'm not going to provide my thoughts on that. Consider that as a thought construct, a brain teaser for the rest of the day, because there's a lot to chew on there, just like there was a lot to chew on this show. So I'll end it there.
Bam. Love it. Well, thank you very much, Nathan, Shaun. Great conversation. Really did enjoy this, and I'm coming away a little wiser from today. This is it's allowed me to kind of process some of the consequential things that are happening based off of the work that we've been putting through. And I think this is a really great thing for people to think about. And I really love that thought construct, Shaun, of the consequence of not dealing with consequence. I love it. Awesome. So I'll wrap it up with the same thing we always do. Thanks, everybody. Continue to learn, build, and grow. See y'all next week. Chimo.